And welcome to PFF at Night. I'm Doug Kyed, joined by Brad Spielberger and Ari Meirov. Brad, you were on the questionable list before the show started, but you are here, maybe not in full voice.
Yeah, I gained a 10 and lost my voice this week. So if it cracks in the middle, don't hold it against me.
Ari, how are you doing today?
Doing well, guys. Officially tomorrow, all 32 teams are in camp. Like, we made it, guys. We're here. Football's back.
Football is officially back. Maybe I'll make it out to a Patriots training camp practice at some point this week since I'm in the New England area. But let's talk about some of the biggest headlines around the NFL right now. Kyler Murray officially signed his new 5-year contract extension today. That was Monday. And I'd say that the biggest note for me on this deal when he did sign it on Thursday was it was just a tiny bit more than Deshaun Watson's contract, making him the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL on an APY basis. Brad, take us through that contract for Kyler Murray a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of interesting notes there. Of course, like you said, first and foremost, gets to inch past that $46 million per year, gets $160 million in total guaranteed dollars, which is more than Josh Allen's $150 million. I actually was able to share some of the details last week about the $4.25 million in per game roster bonuses and $9.3 million in workout bonuses, basically to show up and work out in the offseason. And as this show just started, some more breaking news that Kyler Murray has essentially study hours. He has to commit to 4 hours of game prep each week, intensive game prep. I think there are a lot of narratives we hear sometimes about teams questioning maturity and stuff like that. And I think 99% of the time that is overblown and probably not fair. But based on the terms of this contract, I think it's hard to argue that was not the case in Arizona. They said, we'll pay you, but we're going to have some protections for ourselves as well.
I reached out to some people around the NFL last week after he signed the deal, basically just saying, was he worth this? What are your reactions to this? And I'd say that the majority were that it was inevitable that this kind of contract would be signed by Kyler Murray, that this is what happens when you perform well at quarterback. You get this massive contract extension, and maybe he's not the second best quarterback in the NFL, but essentially he's played well enough to earn this second contract. One person I did reach out to who was within Kyler Murray's division, actually, he was the one person who didn't say that. He thought that he was paid a little bit more, didn't quite earn this contract yet. So we'll see if he does learn up to the figures in this contract. But Ari, what was your initial reaction to Kyler Murray signing the deal and some of these details that are with it?
Yeah, I think, you either have a quarterback in this league or you don't. And I think we've seen at times where Kyler Murray could be an elite quarterback in this league, especially when he's healthy. Once he goes down, I think he had an ankle injury last year, just derails his play and he cannot be himself. And from there, Arizona is not the same team. I think how we ended up getting here is just really fun to look back at. You have to go back to Super Bowl Sunday where we get the Chris Mortensen report that Murray is described as a self-centered person. He's immature and he doesn't, game planning, he isn't really all the way in. I think maybe that kind of comes into what Brad was saying with the contract where they wanted to have some provisions in there. But besides for all that, there was the Instagram scrubbing, there was the agent statement right before the combine. And then all of a sudden everything became quiet. And that's when we knew that things might be going in the right direction. Talks might be going in the right direction. And finally, they struck a deal last week, and now he's locked in for the next 7 years. Really, for me, what I'm looking at is really now that Arizona has a quarterback under contract for years to come, they as a team have to really just figure out and start hitting on their draft picks, really, and just putting young and cheap talent on this roster, because once that contract kicks in, roster building only gets a little bit more difficult. And you look at some of the other teams with high-priced quarterbacks, whether it's the Packers, the Chiefs, the Bills, all these teams with those quarterbacks were able to fill out the roster with some young, cheap talent they find through the draft. Look through some of the recent drafts in Arizona, and it's really not looking so great. So they're going to have to step up their game over there in order to put a good team around Kyler so he could excel and live up to this contract.
Certainly their quarterback and head coach are now tied for the future, which makes sense since they share an agent, Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. And it also seems like the owner and general manager are also tied. But Kingsbury and Steve Keim both signed contract extensions this offseason. So that power atop the organization will be there for quite a while, or at least they're signed to contracts for the foreseeable future. Let's talk about how this relates to Lamar Jackson, Baltimore Ravens quarterback, also seeking a new contract. So, Brad, I'll start this off with you. What impact does this make for Lamar Jackson? Should Lamar Jackson now be asking for a fraction over what Kyler Murray got so that he can now be the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL? What are the repercussions here for Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, I think that will be the case. This is now his floor, and anything below this is not a deal that he's going to take seriously. And I think the quote you got from one of your sources is the same thing. If you want to make the argument that maybe you don't think Lamar Jackson should be the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter, frankly. He's a 2019 MVP. He's a great player. Even some of the narratives about his lack of ability as a pure passer, frankly, are overblown if you look at the data and trust the data by itself. I think the one issue there, the one thing that maybe be a sticking point is he strikes me as a guy who maybe doesn't want to go with this longer deal like some of these players. These Josh Allens, of course, not Patrick Mahomes. Now Kyler Murray, like Ari said, it's 7-year total term. I could see Jackson pushing for 3-4 year extension that lets him maybe get back on the market, re-enter the market earlier. And I think that can maybe be a sticking point with Baltimore.
There was another quote that came out this week about Lamar Jackson, and I think it was from an anonymous defensive coordinator saying that doesn't care how many MVPs Lamar Jackson wins, he's never going to be a number one quarterback. I'm not sure if that means the top quarterback in the NFL or what exactly that meant, but it does seem like there's a lot of Lamar Jackson hate that's been coming out in quotes around the NFL, some negativity out there about Lamar Jackson. I'm not sure why that's coming out. I think that in some ways, like with the Jeremy Fowler piece that came out a couple of weeks ago, it was kind of a nitpick between, all right, is Lamar Jackson a top 10 quarterback or is he the 11th best quarterback in the NFL? I think that stack of quarterbacks is very good. But Ari, do you have any theories on why there's so much negativity about Jackson coming out?
Yeah, I actually asked somebody about this because you mentioned the Fowler piece. He's outside the top 10. Then The Athletic does one of these pieces as well, and it's just negativity driven as well. And the answer I got was an interesting one. It's that there's nobody in the NFL who's really backing him up. In other words, he doesn't have an agent. There's nobody talking to all these people, talking about their client, talking about how great he is. It's really just his teammates like Marquise Brown and those type of people. The Ravens aren't going to be bragging about him to other teams because he's obviously their quarterback. There's no one out there who could really be that guy for him to talk about him. It's really like it's his mother and it's some advisors who are not really football certified people, and that's about it. And really in the draft, we saw him drop to 32. If not for Baltimore trading up for him, he wasn't going to be a first round pick. Some people have the theory he just doesn't have that person who could really be that guy pushing for me. There's not that guy who could tell him, hey, put the phone down during these negotiations. Don't tweet this stuff. Don't start a fight with Bernard Pollard, those type of things, which rubs people the wrong way as a franchise quarterback. Again, you can't deny the talent. This is an MVP quarterback, unanimous MVP, won a playoff game, has been amazing in the regular season. He might not be the style you've been accustomed to, but you can't deny how great he is. But there's a bit of a belief that there's nobody who's sticking up for him when talking to front office people, talking to other agents, talking to personnel people and coaches and that type of thing. And that might be a reason why when people talk to reporters like a Fallow or a Mike Sando, we're getting this negativity coming out.
Certainly not saying this is the case for Jeremy Fowler or Mark Sando. I think that this negativity has been coming out about Lamar Jackson for a long time, since he was in that 2018 NFL draft class. And I think that one of those things is that when you don't have an agent, I think that some writers out there don't feel the need to protect a player, or they don't have to fear an agent coming out at them for stirring some of that negativity. And like I said, certainly not saying that about Jeremy Fowler and Mike Sando. I think that this has been a building issue over the last 4 years or so that now people are just kind of seeing come to a head and seeing kind of culminate right now. So, yeah, I think that could also play into it as well. But I think that Lamar Jackson will certainly, shut some people up with the contract that he eventually signs. And he's obviously looking to have a better season this year now that the Ravens are more healthy around him. Let's talk about Mike McCarthy. He's in a very difficult position as Dallas Cowboys head coach right now with all the rumors swirling around Sean Payton, who currently does not have a head coaching position. I think that, if you're to lay odds on who the head coach of the Cowboys was going to be in 2022. It might be, somewhat even between Sean Payton and Mike McCarthy. So that's a bit of an awkward situation for Mike McCarthy to be in. I think that he said that the first question that he was asked in his news conference this week as they entered training camp was about his future. And it seems like he's kind of getting sick of that a little bit. Ari, can you take us through what Mike McCarthy's answer was about that question?
Yeah, he spoke to the Dallas Morning News, and one of the first questions he was asked about was about his job security with Sean Payton no longer in the NFL, and with Dallas always really being tied to him, especially Jerry Jones. The exact quote from Mike McCarthy was, "It's irritating that the first question you ask me has nothing to do with how I do my job. I show up every day to work to win a championship. And the question I ask myself every day is, how do we win today? That's what I'm asking myself. My viewpoint is that this topic is a non-story. It's a media-driven narrative, or at least a narrative driven outside my realm." So he's clearly sick and tired of it. And again, we're not even into August and we're talking about this. They're coming off a year where they were 12-5, made the playoffs, were close enough to win that game at home over San Francisco. Of course, we all know what happened there. But for a team to make the playoffs and to have the type of roster that they have right now, for this to be the topic, I understand why Mike McCarthy is so upset. But you can wonder, their first two games of the year are against Tampa Bay and Cincinnati. If they're starting the year 0-2, you could imagine the amount of headlines and the topics around every national network will be that Mike McCarthy's on the hot seat. You have a head coach for the rest of the year and Dan Quinn who could take over, and eventually you trade for Sean Payton. He becomes the guy that leads Dallas back to where they once were. So they have to have a good start to this year, or this topic will not end at all.
I think it's also about the finish to the year as well. I mean, last year they go 12-5, like you mentioned, won the AFC East, and then lose in somewhat embarrassing fashion in the wild card round of the playoffs. So I think that that's, if Mike McCarthy does last through those first 2 weeks, through the rest of the season, they can't finish off the season in disappointing or embarrassing fashion. They need to do probably even better than they did last season, which is somewhat tough to do with a 12-5 record, first in the division, playoff loss. But if that's the floor that you're setting, it's kind of hard for Mike McCarthy to surpass that, given the way that the NFL is stacked up right now. I also question what the Cowboys did with their offseason this year, because they actually did lose a significant amount of talent. I think that everyone expected them to be one of the more competitive teams in free agency and in trades. They lose Amari Cooper, La'el Collins, Randy Gregory. I think that if anything, they got worse this season. So, Brad, what would be a successful season for Mike McCarthy? How does he guarantee that he actually gets to keep his job into 2022?
I think that's part of the issue, too, is that the expectations are already so sky high. You probably need to win the NFC East, which is not perceived as a good division, not that it should be, and frankly, win one or multiple playoff games. I also think the original question, Ari touched on it right at the end there. If you polled 100 fans and said, who is the defensive coordinator of each team, I think Dan Quinn would get the highest, hit rate on fans knowing who they're, and even offensive coordinator said, who is the offensive coordinator of all 32 teams? I think Kellen Moore would be one of the highest hit rates among that a group of 100 people. So it then comes down to when they do things correctly or do things well, is he not getting full credit because people perceive you have a former head coach, a guy who made the Super Bowl in Dan Quinn, Kellen Moore, this hot young name that everyone likes to talk about. Granted, he's had some of his own detractors in recent years as well, but I think that's all part of the equation. That is kind of what comes with Dallas. It's the kind of blessing and curse of being in a big market like Dallas, a big football town like Dallas. But I understand where he's coming from in the frustration. Super Bowl winner in his own right, but it's not going away anytime soon.
Ben Roethlisberger, former Steelers quarterback, made some interesting comments recently, saying that it was mostly Kevin Colbert, the Steelers' former GM, who wanted him to move on as the Steelers quarterback. He said, I think Mike Tomlin was a little ready to move on, but I think he was okay with me coming back. I think Mr. Rooney really wanted me to come back last year to play. This is interesting because it seems like there has been kind of a divide between Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers organization this offseason. Seems like, he might not have left on the best terms. So it's interesting that, right now he's blaming it on Kevin Colbert. It seems like the organization might even be saying, no, we wanted you to come back. We wanted you to stay. It was the guy who's leaving who actually didn't want you. But I mean, overall, it was certainly time, based on what we saw from Ben Roethlisberger over the last two seasons, to move on. And now they've got a decision to make between Mitchell Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and Kenny Pickett for who's going to be the starting quarterback in 2022. But Ari, what do you make of this latest Ben Roethlisberger drama, and is it ever really fully going to go away?
Yeah, I mean, now that he's officially away and retired, I think this was his last chance to put out some words about his thoughts about his final year. But if I recall correctly, and Brad could correct me, they gave him a $5 million pay cut, which he accepted, right, to go back to Pittsburgh. I have a feeling, or at least a theory, that they thought he would decline that and they could easily move on, make it a mutual thing. We couldn't agree on it or whatever, but he gladly accepted a $5 million pay cut to come back. It's not like $5 million you earn back with his play, like Baker Mayfield has in Carolina, which is $3.5 million. You can make it back some way, somehow. Here it's $5 million. It's gone no matter what, even if you win the Super Bowl. And he decided to take it and return. It might have been a shock to Kevin Colbert, maybe even to Art Rooney and to Mike Tomlin, but he decided to come back on the pay cut. They brought him in. He somehow made the playoffs, even with probably his worst year as a quarterback in this league. And it was time to move on after this year. He got his farewell. I think it was a very nice farewell considering the year before was the year without fans. So he got to do it in front of the Pittsburgh faithful crowd. And it's time to move on, and they'll have Mitchell Trubisky or Kenny Pickett now. But he made his comments. He's not there anymore. Neither is Kevin Colbert. And it's a new era in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Brad, how rare are those pay cuts?
I was going to say, for a franchise quarterback, probably future Hall of Famer, I shouldn't even say probably, a future Hall of Famer, they're very rare. Even guys that clearly have had their play decline, you try to just, kind of move on with a clean exit. Getting the guy to agree to a pay cut is a challenge. And I actually think his comments are pretty fascinating, not to get too, conspiracy theory, but Kevin Colbert, as already mentioned as well, is also no longer in the NFL. And basically, it sounds like did not want his last season to be tied to Ben Roethlisberger. Did he maybe want to take one of the kids in that last year's draft class in 2021 that he wanted to just ride off into the sunset in a different capacity? Obviously, it did kind of work out with, making the playoffs. That the playoff game was a bit ugly in its own right, but it did work out. But I think it is very interesting for him to kind of zero in and specify specifically the general manager, the guy whose career was also coming to an end, that we all kind of knew that was coming as well. So it wasn't really a surprise to anyone that it happened, and he was already thinking that far ahead. But yeah, the question's 100%. That pay cut does not happen very often.
You've got Kevin Colbert kind of tied to Kenny Pickett as the future of the Steelers at quarterback. And historically bad draft class. Kenny Pickett was the only quarterback taken in the first round of the draft. So we'll see if that draft pick pays off for Pittsburgh. Let's talk about the PUP list. Lots of guys heading onto the PUP list with training camps opening. Want each of us to pick one notable PUP inclusion or exclusion. The guy I'm actually going to start off with is a guy who didn't land on the PUP list, and that's James Robinson, coming off of an Achilles injury. He's been one of the more efficient running backs in the NFL over the last 2 years. And I think we even saw last year that Achilles injuries might not be quite as severe as they used to be in the NFL. And, even if it's been only 220 days or whatever it is since James Robinson tore his Achilles, he's already back to being able to practice. Maybe that's not on a full-time basis, but he's at least able to get out there on the practice field and do something, which is certainly positive for the Jaguars. They've got Travis Etienne coming back at running back. And now those two can kind of compete for snaps in that role. And the team should be overall better with James Robinson on the field, which at times last year he wasn't, because there was some sort of issue or drama between him and Urban Meyer, whoever it was on the Jaguars coaching staff. He should get a fairer shake this season, it seems like. But Ari, who's a notable inclusion or exclusion to the PUP list?
Yeah, I think it's first of all important just to make sure everyone understands not to overreact to most of these, because any player placed on the physically unable to perform list before training camp can come off the list at any time before the regular season begins. So he could literally be on the list for 1 or 2 days and then come off and be on the practice field. A lot of it is precautionary. The one that stuck out to me was David Bakhtiari in Green Bay, who tore his ACL 2 years ago, played only one game last year and barely played in that game, didn't play in the postseason, and is still not ready to get on the field. Obviously, a major concern there if it's still a thing right now. Again, it could be a precautionary thing and come off the list next week, but this has been an ongoing thing for a couple of years now, and he can't get on the field with that torn ACL, which he luckily had after he signed a large extension. So that's a good thing for him. But, him still not being ready is obviously a big deal. And if he's, you're already starting to wonder, will Green Bay have to do more shuffling on the offensive line if it gets to that point where he's not the all-pro player that he once was? Again, you don't want to overreact, but for someone who had an injury happen a couple of years ago, it's definitely one to monitor here in the coming days and weeks.
Well, we're talking about guys going onto the PUP list, and non-football injury, non-football illness relates to that as well. So just want to say that all of our thoughts obviously are with Houston Texans wide receiver John Mechie, who's diagnosed with leukemia, likely to miss his rookie season. Obviously, things are much bigger than football right now with John Mechie, but we're looking forward to the return that he can make when he finally can get back on the football field. But Brad, who's a guy that, you thought it was notable that landed on the PUP list?
Well, I think I have to go with one just because of the public battle that went on between Ian Rappaport and J.K. Dobbins when Rappaport originally reported that he may find himself on the PUP list, and Dobbins took issue with that and said he was ahead of schedule on his recovery and was firing at all cylinders, and he did still land on that PUP list. As Ari said, he could be totally precautionary. He could come off it the next day. But I found it notable that, obviously Rappaport is hearing something that, maybe the team is a little bit more concerned or wants to ease him in slower and make sure he's truly 100% healthy. I also just want to continue on your point, Doug. 100%. Everyone's thinking of John Mechie in Houston, and I thought it was cool. Maybe cool is the wrong word, but Andre Hall, a former Houston Texans cornerback, also diagnosed with a fortunately less, severe form of cancer, but still cancer, and is able to potentially be there, maybe talk with Mechie a little bit and provide some guidance in how you can, fight through that and still think about football in the back of your mind. So all our thoughts and prayers with him, and hopefully he has a good support system around him and can get back on the field.
One final player who did land on the PUP list I just wanted to discuss real quick was Patriots running back James White, who suffered a hip subluxation last season. That was the injury that ended Ryan Fitzpatrick's career. Obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick playing a different position, quarterback, older player, but Mike Reese of ESPN recently noted that James White was still walking with an uncomfortable gait. He was limited during minicamp and OTAs, going to start the training camp on the PUP list, and he only got $500,000 guaranteed as part of his contract signing with the Patriots this offseason. So I could see a little bit different Patriots running back core, at least maybe at the start of the 2022 season. We'll see if James White is ready to go to start the 2022 season, but the Patriots do have a ton of running backs on their roster. Damon Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, J.J. Taylor, then they drafted Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris this offseason as well. So if James White isn't healthy to start the year, certainly a lot of other bodies there at running back for the Patriots. Speaking of the Patriots, let's just finish off this conversation with some uniform and helmet analysis. There are 14 teams who are going to be playing with alternate helmets this year. That's either alternate helmets or throwback helmets, the Patriots being one of those teams, bringing back the white Patriot helmets. There's been a lot of pub over the throwbacks, obviously. You've got the Patriots, the Giants, a few other teams in there. But some of the alternate helmets, I think, have kind of fallen under the radar because teams are announcing these things on like Saturday and Sunday, Friday at 4 p.m., whatever it is. The best one to me personally is the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that's the case with a lot of people, the white Siberian tiger helmet. I think the second best alternate helmet, not including the throwbacks, is the Eagles helmet. I just think it's the cleanest one. Black helmet, you've got the same Eagles decal on it. I think it reminds me a little bit of those Oregon helmets from a few years ago when Chip Kelly was head coach. Yeah. I think that a lot of the other helmets that are in there, the alternate helmets, they're basically just like slapping their usual logo on a black helmet, and it doesn't really overall work for me. The Eagles one just works for me better than some of the other ones. But Ari, what's been your favorite, alternate helmet or uniform combination that we're going to see in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of these are just really great. Like I like the Texans one, which is a bit all red. That one was pretty nice. But yeah, the throwbacks are the ones that really strike to me. The Giants one with their throwback jerseys, those are just gorgeous. Nowhere a couple of times this year. Even the Cowboys bringing back their Thanksgiving one with the star on the helmet, but not the silver one, the white one. I think that one is great. If there's one that I wasn't a fan of, I'll be honest with you, the Jets going with the all black and now going to the throwbacks, that one annoyed me a little bit. Like, you guys have a really nice throwback helmet you can go to with the jet and everything. And to go just black with the Jets on it, like, I feel like they could have done better there. But overall, I mean, it's nice to see the NFL changing the rules a little bit, adding some flexibility to the jerseys. I'm amazed just to see the reaction it gets on Twitter, on social. The amount of fans that just love this stuff is incredible. And I think this is the first year they're doing it. And I think we'll probably have more coming in the next year as the rules have changed here over the last year. So we'll likely have more of them coming up next year. Looking forward to see how they all unfold this year and how these players look in them.
Brad, I need your helmet and uniform takes. Most importantly, that orange Bears helmet that was debuted recently.
I knew it was coming. I was waiting for that to get mentioned. I think you mentioned how some got dropped on Sunday. I get why Chicago put out that puke orange helmet on Sunday. Try to avoid as many quote tweets as possible. Definitely not a fan. And with the orange jersey too, I just don't think it makes a ton of sense. But I'll stay positive. The Atlanta Falcons bringing the red back, I think, is awesome. I think it's one of the coolest helmets, maybe because we saw prime time playing it and whatnot. But yes, the orange one, I was hoping to not have to even address the Chicago Bears orange helmet if I could get away with it.
I need these brought back next season, like 100% brought back next season.
Yes.
Maybe not my my like child's whatever hunt like helmet this is, but we need the Seahawks silver helmets back in 2023. I'm not sure why those weren't brought back this year. Maybe it's going to be part of an overall uniform rehaul that the overhaul that the Seahawks are going to do, because those uniforms are getting maybe a little bit dated at this point. But that was the one that I was waiting for that never came. But that will do it for this week's or Monday's PFF at Night. We will be back with you guys again on Wednesday. Keep it on pff.com for all of your news and analysis. Use PFF40 for 40% off any annual subscription to PFF. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed. And we expect there to be significantly more news with training camps officially opening up across the league on Wednesday.